that we had to fly the mission that we were trained to fly, then we were failures.
Now, fewer in number, they carry on a mission of a different kind. Their constant vigil ended. Diamond-edged guillotines break the backs of these winged cold warriors. Just outside of Tucson, Arizona, B-52 carcasses are displayed for the Russian satellites to witness. America's strategic bomber force once numbered more than 1,000. Today, there are less than 200 bombers left in the Air Force. Nearly 70 of these are the surviving B-52s. Around 100 more are the newer B-1Bs. Designed to fight World War III, both carry on the strategic bomber legacy, reinvented for the post-Cold War world.
Right now, a B-1 on the deck, scared and running, is arguably the fastest airplane in the world down low. Anything that might see it is going to have to get down on the deck and chase it, and that's going to be a very difficult thing.
It's probably the largest roller coaster ride that anyone could probably ever go on, and I get to do it for free.
Not too long ago, its sole mission was to carry up to 24 nuclear bombs to the heart of Mother Russia. Each of them 25 times more powerful than the one dropped on Hiroshima. Now, B-1 crews spend most of their time preparing to deliver a non-nuclear munition anywhere on the globe in a moment's notice. Typically, this intercontinental weapon strikes from 500 feet at more than 900 miles per hour.
By combining these factors of low observability, great weapons capability, and fantastic command control communications along with high speed and long range, you have a potential war winner. Something that would allow you to go and do with one aircraft what took a dozen F-117s on the first night of the Persian Gulf War in 1991.
In 1991, when war sent America's most elite strike fighters to the Persian Gulf, America's newest bomber was left behind. After 5 years preparing to carry out a nuclear strike, crews and planes were simply not ready for the fast-paced, precision-planned conventional operation. Critics used its absence in the Gulf to prove the machine a flying waste of taxpayer money. They said that this nuclear bomber, an ineffective product of 1970s technology, just didn't fit in the post-Cold War world. Months after Desert Storm, the Bone, as its crews call it, was reconfigured to carry 84 500-pound conventional bombs.
We're trying to hit things down to single digits. We had frankly something to prove. Yeah, the B-1 was capable of bombing in a real small accuracy.
They're now part of the rest of the force. Being nuclear always has meant that you're carved off and you're put in a corner and you're somehow different or special. And being different and special is not always a good thing in the military. Now, bomber crews, they get to go and play with the fighter guys and the electronic warfare guys.
Okay, good morning, crews. This is the pre-brief for tomorrow's sorties. We'll go through the...
They're going to destroy something and they can come home and maybe feel a little better about it. They get to be part of the team for the first time.
Carrying a 50,000-pound payload and only radars, chaff, and flare to defend itself, the B-1 is ready.
Havoc 053, back is correct. Contact tower ready for departure. Havoc 5 clear for takeoff. Departure frequency.
With its variable geometry wings fully outstretched and the engines flooding with JP-4, the Bone rises off the tarmac in West Texas.
It's pretty good right now, but there's a fast from the south moving north. They're saying 30 minutes or so it's going to be close to the bottom.
Moments after launch, the B-1 takes on nearly 200,000 pounds of fuel from a waiting tanker. With a full fuel load, the B-1 has a range of over 7,000 miles at a cruising altitude of 25,000 feet. Aerial refueling means it can sustain flight for as long as the four-person crew can last in the cockpit. And although the plane is half the length of a football field, its cramped cabin is no larger than 4 telephone booths.
Personalities fit in the cockpit, regardless of how they are. If you're asking, do they have some kind of a jock mentality, I don't see that because of the fact that we don't allow that pretty much on the crew because we are 4 people coming together as one cohesive unit. So if one person is a little bit different than the others, we'll try to conform them to fit into our little cohesive unit, if you will.
The pilot and co-pilot sit up front. The offensive and defensive systems officers in a separate compartment about 6 feet behind them.
The offensive systems officer, his job is to get the switches configured and get the INS configured and everything so that he can drop bombs the most accurate way he can. On the other hand, the DSO is primarily concerned with threats in the target area. And if you think about it, where are we going to strike? We're not going to go strike somewhere that probably is not defended. So his job is going to be busy, my job is going to be busy, and the pilots have to kind of juggle the two of us because we're kind of separated at the time. I've got to get the bombs on target, but the D's got to defend the aircraft.
The B-1's payload is meant to strike at the very heart of the enemy's war machine. Munitions factories, command centers, bunkers. Targets typically located deep behind enemy lines.
Usually if we go into a target area, the target area is going to be saturated, not only ground threats, but air-to-air threats. So this is where things start getting a little intense.
This is the warning that an enemy aircraft has been spotted 25 miles away on the defensive system officer's screen. Before the enemy fighter closes in for the kill, the B-1 pilot points the aircraft 20 degrees nose down, puts it in terrain-following mode, and lets go of the stick. With its wings swept back, the plane drops from 25,000 feet to 500 in less than a minute.
You're sitting there with your hands by your side watching this airplane hit towards the ground, and you're just concentrated on that scope. Is this airplane doing what it's supposed to?
The B-1 is doing what it must to survive. Once spotted by the fighter's radar, the unarmed bomber is as good as dead. The crew's best bet is to hide the 400,000-pound jet in the ground clutter below.
You don't have to completely defeat the threat. You just have to momentarily defeat the threat. Buy yourself a couple seconds here and a couple seconds there.
The bomber's greatest defense is its ability to hug the deck and slip beneath enemy radar at near supersonic speed.
We use the terrain to our advantage when we're low. Like if you were water, where would you flow, you know? And you use that terrain to get yourself buried in there as best you can.
Making the B-1 resemble a catfish, the fins on the aircraft's nose help stabilize it at low levels. Flying a few hundred feet off the ground, frequently at night, pilots count on the terrain-following radar to keep the plane from hitting the dirt. However critical to survival, radar sensors can also give away the bone's position. Once in the battle area, B-1 crews turn off any unnecessary electronics to reduce its footprint. plane's unguided iron bombs are little changed from those used by World War II airmen, but the systems used to aim them are. Here, the offensive radar takes over. The Navigator Bombardier uses a radar-generated map to guide the pilots to the target.
I'm plotting what kind of edge you got, just left of center at about 90.
Because the B-1 travels faster than the human eye can focus a bomb site, the Bombardier relies on a computer to release the bombs at the right place and time.
Yeah, let me see if you check.
If I drop this bomb right now, where will it go? And if it says I'm not going to get any closer than right now, then it'll go ahead and release. So the system is constantly updating itself at a very fast rate.
Hitting the bullseye means calculating wind direction, speed, and timing perfectly. Seconds too late or too soon, and their payload can sail hundreds of feet off target. In just 3 seconds, the plane releases 84 bombs in a perfect line.
The shack, 0-0. Center bomb on the target. Probably 1% of the time, maybe, as the shack occurs. I call it luck, but that's what we all want to get. That's what we strive for, and that's what we train for.
But for many B-1 crews, close is good enough. Even up to 50 feet off the target, the string of exploding 500-pound dumb bombs leaves a charred scar a third of a mile long and 100 feet across. After 4 hours in the cockpit, the pilots return to a 10-knot crosswind on the runway.
When you're coming in and trying to land with a crosswind or gusty winds, it's particularly challenging because a big gust of wind can come along just as you're at a very slow airspeed and high angle of attack, just trying to touch down, and that gust of wind blows the airplane.
For the men and women at Dyess Air Force Base, today's mission was a typical day at the office. This wasn't always the case. (1977), after sinking nearly 10 years and millions of dollars into the first B-1, an Air Force study determined that 60% of the B-1 force would be downed by Soviet air defenses before ever reaching the target.
And lead tankers rolled out heading 245 and on speed.
Critics claimed that the bone could not jam modern Soviet radar defenses in order to penetrate enemy airspace. President Jimmy Carter canceled the program.
And here it is, ladies and gentlemen, the most advanced strategic aircraft in the world, the B-1B.
But just 4 years later, the bone was resurrected. Some say that by 1981, the $20 billion bomber program fit well into the Reagan administration's effort to spend the USSR into oblivion. Just as important, it was the only airplane available to replace America's aging strategic workhorse, the B-52 Stratofortress. Nearly 30 years old, the 52 was an elderly veteran that many said wouldn't survive the 80s. Today it flies on as the oldest aircraft in the Air Force inventory. It is projected to serve to the year 2030 in the conventional role. But like the B-1, it too can be reconfigured for its doomsday mission in just a few hours. A mission that even today, American pilots still quietly train for.
The nuclear mission, yeah, you had that big long track line that might go on for 4 and 5 hours, page after page on this chart, and sometimes that was all you saw was a track line and train and a few towns here and there, and sometimes you had no clue where it was.
One black line, one bomber, one target. a scenario repeated by thousands of pilots. Together, it is the SIOP, the Single Integrated Operational Plan. First designed in 1960, it envisioned a day when scores of American nuclear bombers and missiles would be sent to hit countless targets across mainland China and the USSR. The man most credited with engineering America's doomsday machine was General Curtis LeMay, the first commander-in-chief of the nation's nuclear arsenal, known as SAC, or Strategic Air Command. It was under his guidance that American bombers burnt Tokyo to the ground and ultimately brought Japan to its knees during World War II. Some claim that during the years that followed, at the height of the Cold War, General LeMay would encourage Presidents Eisenhower and Kennedy to unleash a bolt-out-of-the-blue full-scale nuclear attack on the Soviet Union.
General LeMay, he was the first legitimate and righteous purveyor of megadeath. This is a man who, before there was ever a nuclear weapon put in his arsenal, had probably killed or ordered the death of several million people, be they Germans, Italians, Japanese, during the Second World War. And one has to wonder if the experience did not desensitize him so that he was able to rationalize megadeath and still be able to sleep at night.
LeMay's fervor became the standard for the bomber pilots under his command.
I'm sure that Stratcom in their various personality performance profiling tests and such looked for people who could go ahead and deal with the potential horrors of a post-Holocaust world. I mean, that they could go do their missions and be able to go drop a weapon of unthinkable power on potentially a large population center and then walk away and try and continue their life.
We had a mission and we performed it, and we told our families very little about what we really did. They know generally what we did. We never discussed with them targets, our mission, or any of that. You just couldn't humanly think about it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
As recently as 1991, SAC bomber crews sat an around-the-clock vigil near their planes, fully loaded with nuclear bombs, waiting for the warning that World War III was underway. The idea was if Russian missiles did penetrate American airspace, all bombers had to be airborne in 15 minutes or be dead.
3, 2, 1, deturn.
During the Cold War, the United States practiced redundancy. The first line of defense was the intercontinental ballistic missile, some carrying up to 10 nuclear warheads each. The next leg of the triad was the bomber force.
No matter what the other side did, whether they launched a surprise attack against our missile sites, they would still have our airplanes to contend with.
For 34 years, bomber crews sat alert in facilities like this one at Dyess Air Force Base. At one time, there were more than 100 such compounds. Major T.J. Smith spent nearly 2 years of his life here waiting for the klaxon to sound, the signal that Russian missiles were on their way. Crews lived underground for added protection in the event of a nuclear attack.
This was my room for a good number of years, but you generally had one person per room. We had one airplane on alert, so we had 4 B-1 crew members.
Now, B-1 crews practice the nuclear mission just once a month. The alert facility is surrounded by a 10-foot-high electric fence and microwave sensors.
Probably the overwhelming thing that I remember the most about alert was the security that went around it. Getting in and out of the area, just into the facility, in and out to your airplane, security was the utmost. The guards looked like they were ready to throw you down and beat you up at a moment's notice.
Then up this ramp, after the klaxon went off, we'd run out this way and head out to the parking spot where our airplane was located. Sensors were dug into the runway, and it was made an electronic field here. So if you broke the plane with this electronic field, then the security police would respond to the airplane. About once every alert tour, you'd have a jackrabbit or a dog would come out through here and break the sensor. And once that happened, the security police would come and respond, and then the crew would have to come out and check the airplane to make sure everything was okay. And it always happened between 2 to 4 in the morning. So we had some late nights every once in a while trying to calm everybody down.
Planes also had to be hair trigger ready.
We could place the aircraft into an alert configuration by running all the normal pre-flight systems checks, get them into a code 1 status. At that time, we could take the APU switches, the auxiliary power unit switches, put them into the alert configuration along with the battery, raise the ladder up, and now the jet's going to be ready to respond. All we have to do is come down, hit the alert start, and the engines will be ready to start in about 30 seconds.
Until 1991, the klaxon would sound 3 times a week, sending crews in a race for their lives to get the aircraft off the ground. Until the men reached the cockpit and decoded an incoming message from SAC headquarters, they had no way of knowing whether or not the alert was real.
And left. So that always concerned us.
The plane that Lieutenant Ovidio Pugnale depended on to carry him into World War III was a B-52D. Typically, it was loaded with 4 1-megaton bombs. Today's B-52 can carry up to 20 such bombs, each more than 25 times the power of the 2 weapons that leveled Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The first bomb dropped on Hiroshima was 13 kilotons. The second dropped on Nagasaki a little over 20. Captain Kermit Behan, bombardier over Nagasaki, recalls his greatest moment.
I suppose it was when the clouds opened up over the target at Nagasaki. The target was there pretty as a picture. I made the run, let the bomb go. That was my greatest thrill.
Over 100,000 lives lost. Nearly 10 square miles of thriving cities turned into rubble.
It's funny we say only 20 kilotons because, you know, when we dropped those 2 weapons, we dropped those on medium-sized, fairly crowded urban complexes in Japan. And we killed, in those 2 cities, maybe 150, 200,000 people if you include the secondary effects. Now that's with a pair of 20 kiloton devices. The average weapon that we run around with today is a 500 kiloton device. That is 25 times bigger than the one we dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
The original atom bomb weighed in at 8,900 pounds and required 5 men and a hoisting rig to cram it into the B-29 bomb bay.
When the thermonuclear weapon came out, then I think thoughtful people began to ask, is this a weapon of war, or as Eisenhower said, is it a form of insanity?
A decade of innovative American engineering gave birth to the thermonuclear weapon, a greater bang in a smaller package. By 1960, this government effort to miniaturize megadeath paralleled another to convince American citizens that nuclear war is survivable.
There was a turtle by the name of Bert, and Bert the turtle was very constantly alert. When danger threatened him, he never got hurt. He knew just what to do. He'd duck and cover, duck and cover, duck.
I remember as a child growing up, of course, the duck and cover exercises. The little turtle doing his duck and cover routine. We look upon those as humorous today. At the time, they were deadly serious.
It's a bomb. Duck and cover.
The effects of a 500 kiloton weapon today, properly delivered, the fireball alone would probably cover the whole of Manhattan Island if it was dropped from downtown New York.
As American citizens practiced to save themselves from the pending shower of nuclear bombs and missiles, American pilots studied every town, hill, and bridge in the Soviet Union and Red China. For the bomber crew, nuclear war is not about how to survive it. It is about endless hours of study to guarantee that your enemy doesn't. In 1961, Bob Kramer was a SAC pilot at the helm of a B-47.
But you only had one target. That target was your specialty. You knew that target like you knew the back of your hand. And most of the stuff, because we studied it so often, it was like knowing your kid.
At the height of the Cold War, a worldwide launch of SAC bombers would have sent a total of 1,500 planes airborne, mostly B-47 Stratojets. By the late 1950s, the American bomber force was built around 1,000 of these shiny Boeing machines. The PSYOP called for several aircraft to hit the same target at precisely timed intervals.
Ours was not going to be the only weapon on any one specific target. They had a redundancy factor built in. By the time I got to my target, for instance, it could have had 15 or 20 or 30 nuclear devices delivered on it.
Let's have an interphone check.
There was some question, because of the destruction that would be done to the target, that we could even find the target area once we got there.
Strategic targets are defined as anything that is part of the enemy's war-making capability.
As a crew dog, I was given the targets, but we were never told that we were doing a strike against populated areas just for the effect. They were military hardened targets is what we went after.
Unfortunately, the military-industrial complexes are in population centers. I mean, look at the Pentagon, for instance. That's in a population center.
To reach their target, the crews had to fly higher and faster than the latest Soviet air defenses. As the first swept-wing all-jet bomber, the B-47 Stratojet sustained flight at 600 miles an hour and 40,000 feet, where no Soviet fighter could touch it. Defying the stereotype that bombers are flying dump trucks, B-47 pilots even practiced a fighter-like tactic to guarantee a safe escape from the nuclear bomb blast and the almost seismic aftershock.
A tactic that they used, which they called a LABS maneuver, and it stood for low altitude ballistic something or the other. The airplane actually came in at low level. It pulled up and did what we refer to as an Immelman, where when the airplane got to about this point, it would release the weapon. Of course, the trajectory of the weapon would take it in a parabolic arc to the target, and we would pull the airplane up and then roll it out. And that was to avoid the blast effects of the weapon and so forth.
The B-47 swept-wing design, compact 110-foot-long body, and speed made this tactic possible. But the G-forces required to carry it out stressed the bomber's frame until cracks in the fuselage finally doomed the maneuver. Tactics aside, there was no way to completely escape from the deadly mass rising from the impact area. The mushroom cloud of a 1 megaton bomb reaches up 40,000 feet and can spread over an area of hundreds of square miles.
Advanced techniques make it possible for these trained crews to fly through the cloud without harm, even to stay inside of it for a while, if they observe the precautions taught by experience.
It was almost a standing joke. To begin with, you're flying in a nuclear and radioactive environment. The air conditioning in the airplane basically came from the engines. And we were taking in outside air. If the outside air is radioactive, it's coming into the airplane and into the pressurization system.
Any aircraft that has been used for cloud sampling or cloud tracking operations will carry traces of radiological contamination. The Air Force has only recently developed a method of washing contaminated planes which makes them safe and ready for service within 24 hours.
This is an airborne laboratory with a staff of doctors to test the effects of the bomb's initial light on the human eye. Out of this experiment will come considerable specific knowledge about protection.
We wore an eye patch. So the co-pilot was not flying the airplane, had his peephole open, he covered one eye with an eye patch. I said, well, why? He said, well, if a weapon did go off, it would blind both your eyes. Well, in this case, it would only blind one eye, you see. So you say, well, I've been blinded in one eye, and you just calmly took the patch, and, and then, of course, you could take it off, so you had one eye left.
Officially, SAC crews were told to make their way to safe areas in Turkey or North Africa after unloading their bombs. Privately, they believed that if the worst ever became a reality, theirs would be a one-way mission.
Yes, we had safe areas, and I don't know if we ever thought that we would get to those safe areas, or if that was something psychological that they told us, oh, if something happened, you get into these safe areas there, and there's going to be a McDonald's there, and somebody's going to be there to comfort you and that sort of thing.
And that's why we started saying, well, we'll just land at some island and take the island over and just camp out for a couple years and, then just show up later in life.
3 or 4 years on alert and going through the same exercise over and over again, you just didn't think that much of it anymore until it came in 1962 to the Cuban crisis. Then we thought a lot. We were scared. I was.
September 8th, 1962. A Soviet ship loaded with medium-range ballistic missiles arrives in communist Cuba, 90 miles away from U.S. shores. The missiles can annihilate Washington, D.C., New York, and most of the eastern seaboard in one strike. To Soviet Chairman Nikita Khrushchev, putting the many medium-range missiles within striking distance of the U.S. balances out the formidable American ICBM arsenal. American intercontinental ballistic missiles are far more numerous and reliable than their Soviet counterparts. Before the nation is informed, SAC leadership deploys nearly 700 bombers and their crews to the southeastern United States under the guise of a pre-planned exercise. The Navy amasses ships and men in Florida in what would be the largest amphibious invasion since World War II. Aboard his B-47, Lieutenant Bob Kramer and his crew move from Little Rock Air Base to Memphis Naval Air Station, part of an effort to disperse the force in the event of a Russian attack.
A member of my crew called me and said, something's up. I'll be by to pick you up in 30 minutes. Everything was very hush-hush. We weren't allowed to call home. I had a question about the safety of my family, but I figured that this was going to be a one-way mission for me. I was never going to come back from it. The question in my mind at the time was, how many missiles could they put in there? How many targets could they strike? I guess I just had some big questions. I mean, we had missiles stationed in forward areas, targeted against the Russians. So to me, it was more or less tit for tat. And I couldn't imagine anybody being foolish enough to use anything like that.
To halt this offensive buildup, a strict quarantine on all offensive military equipment under shipment to Cuba is being initiated. All ships of any kind bound for Cuba, from whatever nation or port, will, if found to contain cargoes of offensive weapons, be turned back. It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union.
The naval blockade is Kennedy's tripwire, and the penalty for crossing it is an airborne armada heading for far more than just the Soviet Union.
The targets were already picked, and a large number were going to Russia, a large number were going to China, and a significant number was going to Eastern Europe, regardless of what precipitated the war.
We had always been targeted in the USSR, and mainly military industrial complexes in the USSR, and now we were targeted against Red China, which the ramification of that to me was that this is going to be an all-out thing. It's going to be a worldwide war.
Well, you know, you take your opportunities. If you're going to have a major release of nuclear weapons somewhere in the world, and it's going to essentially be a free fire zone, wouldn't it make sense that the Air Force leadership would go ahead and hit everybody they could who they felt was an enemy of the United States?
I had a lot of anger centered around that because my opinion at the time was that President Kennedy had made a big mistake, that he was basically playing poker, you know, with the Russians, and we were the pawns.
To plan his next move, the president authorizes U-2 flights over Cuba. October 27th, one plane is shot down, killing the pilot. On the same day, one Soviet ship crosses the line, violating the blockade. For the first time in history, SAC places the crews on DEFCON 2, just one level removed from actual war.
I can remember being in the airplane early in the morning, 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, with weapons loaded. We were sitting in the airplane with a power cart hooked up to the airplane, ready to start the engines.
General LeMay sees in the crisis a great opportunity and urges the young president to launch a full-scale attack against Cuba. Kennedy sends a message to Khrushchev that if the missiles are not removed, the United States will strike.
Poor old Khrushchev and the people around him, I don't think, understood the people they were facing very well. And I think it's apparent that they guessed wrong.
50 days after the missiles arrive, Khrushchev agrees to remove them. Realizing that a strike is now out of the question, General LeMay claims, "It is the greatest defeat in our history, Mr. President."
We must have been there for, I'd say, probably 3 or 4 hours before the order came through to stand down. I didn't feel that what we were doing was the right thing, but at the same time, it was my job, and I was doing my job. And I believe to this day that very few people in this country realize how close we came at that time to total nuclear annihilation.
In the wake of the crisis, Kennedy realizes that SAC leadership had had only one plan in place, a full-blown nuclear counterattack.
So it was McNamara says, hey, you aren't giving the president any options. And they changed it. But can you imagine? You know, if China does something aggressive with the U.S. and you happen to be sipping your coffee in Moscow looking at incoming ballistic missiles. I mean, insanity.
For the remaining 29 years of the Cold War, the world would never again come so close to nuclear war.
Whatever the zealotry of the top leadership at SAC may have been during those time frames, they really firmly believed, and I think they were correct, that if the other guy never came after us and we never sent our forces after him, In other words, if we maintain the balance of terror, then we won. We went a half a century, which is unprecedented in man's history, without a major continental or worldwide conflict. And I would have to say, maybe a little grudgingly, they were right.
Today, the shrinking arsenal of the post-Cold War era leaves the Air Force with 180 bombers. And some say this number hasn't dwindled far enough. As the United States and former Soviet Union struggle to undo 50 years of distrust and overkill, General Lee Butler, the last commander of Strategic Air Command, advocates total elimination of the arsenal he once controlled.
Standing down nuclear arsenals requires only a fraction of the ingenuity and resources as were devoted to their creation. I could see for the first time the prospect of restoring a world free of the apocalyptic threat of nuclear weapons. A world free of the threat of nuclear weapons is necessarily a world devoid of nuclear weapons.
I'm like a lot of people who aren't all that comfortable giving up my nukes. You know, they keep me warm at night. I get a lot of assurance out of them. And yet, if I'm willing to back away and open my mind, those people, like General Butler and like General Horner, may be right. Maybe we need to go and actually get rid of these things and promote their elimination worldwide for the simple reason that they're not a usable weapon. And if anybody does, they're going to be a pariah around the world.
We cannot uninvent the nuclear bomb. We cannot repeal E equals MC squared. Nuclear genie is out of the bottle, and it is illusory, I believe, to think that we can put it back in.
Even with the threat of full-scale nuclear war vastly diminished, the winged leg of the triad has not completely shed its legacy. In a world of uncertainty, the flexibility of the bomber still holds a lot of appeal.
I think the bombers will continue to have a role as long as we have these weapons. And the reason for that is that the bombers can be scrambled, they can be subject to recall.
If American bomber crews were ever sent on the Doomsday mission, it is unlikely that the B-1 will carry them into nuclear battle. The adjustment of the Bones bomb bays to fit conventional munitions officially takes them out of the nuclear count. It is doubtful that hundreds of American bombers will darken the skies of their enemies, dropping indiscriminate nuclear loads on the cities below. Instead, they will uphold a new era that may change the nature of deterrence itself.
I think that we may see a world someday where the vices of nuclear weapons will so outweigh their virtues, the countries may actually give them up in preference to precision strike.
Precision strikes crippled Iraq during the Gulf War, something nuclear bombing has never done. With new satellite-guided weapons called the JDAM, or Joint Direct Attack Munition, the B-1 will be able to achieve near precision by 1998.
If you can target it, and you can target it with accuracy, you can hold it at risk, and that is a deterrence force.
By the turn of the century, bombs like the JDAM will be carried on the same rotary launchers that once carried the instruments of Armageddon. Given the choice, the B-1 crews at Dyess Air Force Base choose precision over plutonium any day.
Good day to go fly.
With its variable geometry wings fully outstretched and the engines flooding with JP-4, the Bone rises off the tarmac in West Texas. moments after launch, the B-1 takes on nearly 200,000 pounds of fuel from a waiting tanker. With a full fuel load, the B-1 has a range of over 7,000 miles at a cruising altitude of 25,000 feet. Aerial refueling means it can sustain flight for as long as the four-person crew can last in the cockpit. And although the plane is half the length of a football field, its cramped cabin is no larger than 4 telephone booths.
The personalities fit in the cockpit, regardless of how they are. If you're asking, do they have some kind of a jock mentality, I don't see that. Because of the fact that we don't allow that pretty much on the crew, because we are 4 people coming together as one cohesive unit. So if one person is a little bit different than the others, we'll try to conform them to fit into our little cohesive unit, if you will.
The pilot and co-pilot sit up front. The offensive and defensive system
that we had to fly the mission that we were trained to fly. Then we were failures.
Now, fewer in number, they carry on a mission of a different kind. Their constant vigil ended. Diamond-edged guillotines break the backs of these winged cold warriors. Just outside of Tucson, Arizona, B-52 carcasses are displayed for the Russian satellites to witness. America's strategic bomber force once numbered more than 1,000. Today, there are less than 200 bombers left in the Air Force. Nearly 70 of these are the surviving B-52s. Around 100 more are the newer B-1Bs. Designed to fight World War III, both carry on the strategic bomber legacy, reinvented for the post-Cold War world.
Right now, a B-1 on the deck, scared and running, is arguably the fastest airplane in the world down low. Anything that might see it is going to have to get down on the deck and chase it, and that's going to be a very difficult thing.
It's probably the largest roller coaster ride that anyone could probably ever go on, and I get to do it for free.
In the post-Cold War world, months after Desert Storm, the Bone, as its crews call it, was reconfigured to carry 84 500-pound conventional bombs.
We were trying to hit things down to single digits. We had, frankly, something to prove. Yeah, the B-1 was capable of bombing in a real small accuracy.
They're now part of the rest of the force. Being nuclear always has meant that you're carved off and you're put in a corner and you're somehow different or special. And being different and special is not always a good thing in the military. Now, bomber crews, they get to go and play with the fighter guys and the electronic warfare guys.
Okay, good morning, crews. This is the pre-brief for tomorrow's sorties. We'll go through the...
They're going to destroy something and they can come home and maybe feel a little better about it. They get to be part of the team for the first time.
Carrying a 50,000-pound payload and only radars, chaff, and flare to defend itself, the B-1 is ready.
Havoc 053, back is correct. Contact tower ready for departure. Departure frequency will be 239.05.
Customs officers in a separate compartment about 6 feet behind them.
The offensive systems officer, his job is to get the switches configured and get the INS configured and everything so that he can drop bombs the most accurate way he can. On the other hand, the DSO is primarily concerned with threats in the target area. And if you think about it, where are we going to strike? We're not going to go strike somewhere that probably is not defended. So his job is going to be busy, my job is going to be busy, and the pilots have to kind of juggle the two of us because we're kind of separated at the time. I've got to get the bombs on target, but the D's got to defend the aircraft.
The B-1's payload is meant to strike at the very heart of the enemy's war machine. Munitions factories, command centers, bunkers. Targets typically located deep behind enemy lines.
Usually if we go into a target area, the target area is going to be saturated, not only ground threats, but air-to-air threats. So this is where things start getting a little intense.
This is the warning that an enemy aircraft has been spotted 25 miles away on the defensive system officer's screen. Before the enemy fighter closes in for the kill, the B-1 pilot points the aircraft 20 degrees nose down, puts it in terrain-following mode, and lets go of the stick. With its wings swept back, the plane drops from 25,000 feet to 500 in less than a minute.
You're set.
Not too long ago, its sole mission was to carry up to 24 nuclear bombs to the heart of Mother Russia. Each of them 25 times more powerful than the one dropped on Hiroshima. Now, B-1 crews spend most of their time preparing to deliver a non-nuclear munition anywhere on the globe in a moment's notice. Typically, this intercontinental weapon strikes from 500 feet at more than 900 miles per hour.
By combining these factors of low observability, great weapons capability, and fantastic command control communications along with high speed and long range, you have a potential war winner, something that would allow you to go and do with one aircraft what took a dozen F-117s on the first night of the Persian Gulf War in 1991.
In 1991, when war sent America's most elite strike fighters to the Persian Gulf, America's newest bomber was left behind. After 5 years preparing to carry out a nuclear strike, crews and planes were simply not ready for the fast-paced, precision-planned conventional operation. Critics used its absence in the Gulf to prove the machine a flying waste of taxpayer money. They said that this nuclear bomber, an ineffective product of 1970s technology, just didn't fit